I'm the War Nerd, and this video is in response to a request I had from somebody who was asking about how to, basically about getting into game dev and how to get started and what are sort of some of the things you need to know to start getting involved in developing games. Well, this guy was he's quite young, like a teenager, and he wanted to create a first-person shooter using Play Canvas. So obviously quite an ambitious aim, but I thought I'd talk a little bit about some of the tools you can utilize, some of the things you can use when you're starting off in game development, and just some of the things you'll have to learn to start becoming an indie game developer, basically. So it's going to be like sort of advice and some of the references to tools you might want to use. So I think if you're going to be a good games developer, you need a sort of broad range of skills. You need to sort of be a bit of a everyman with lots of different tools and lots of different skills. So you're going to want to have an imagination, of course. That's important. You want to have some design skills in terms of thinking about game mechanics, thinking about interesting game mechanics, which is basically how the game works, like game features. You want to think about graphics, 3D, 2D, pixel art, that sort of thing. A bit of sound design, and obviously the big one, and the one that's often a hurdle for a lot of people, is the programming part. So you're going to have to learn about how to structure scripts for functionality in a game. So, where to begin? So in terms of tools you might want to explore if you're getting into game dev, there's the obvious engines out there like Unity and Unreal, which are still like the most used for indie games and indie titles. You maybe just want to create like something very simple, like the FPS, like I was asked about. Game Guru can be quite interesting for that. Only really specifically if you're making FPSs, but if you just want to experiment a bit with like terrain design and stuff, that can be quite good. Obviously, Unreal Engine is something you probably want to get into, in Unity once you feel more confident, but it doesn't really hurt to get into those things. To get like experiment with Game Guru or something like Coppercube. In terms of learning game programming, I'd say probably start with simple projects, nothing too complicated. Certainly not anything like maybe 3D, but not like really advanced 3D game design, because that can be a bit more complicated for sure, like the collision boxes and bounded boxes and all that sort of thing. So like some key advice I'd say, actually, if you want to start making games, just make things that have already been made. Like one of the first games I think I made, and it was when I was working for a company, actually, it was a version of Pong using JavaScript and React, I think, from what I remember. But that can be a quite good thing to do. So just reproduce a game that already exists. It could even be Pac-Man, or it could be whatever. Think of a classic game format and just try and reproduce it. There's plenty of YouTube tutorials out there for simple games. I'll probably try and do one myself, I think, in the future. Maybe even Pong. I've been thinking of reproducing something like the Pong game that I designed a while ago, and then just putting that online. So watch out for that, I guess. In terms of learning the languages you need to use for games programming, often is C++, actually, and JavaScript sometimes, for web-like based games usually. But I mean, the go-to language for games programming is C++ still, as far as I'm aware. So, and I know nothing about that, so I can't really comment on that. C++ specifically. Unreal Engine also supports widgets, which is like a sort of visual programming language, which can be quite good as well. And this So that's worth looking into too. But essentially what I'd say is if you are just getting into this thing, then you need to sort of get into a lot of different strands of technology. Sound design, like I mentioned, game design, programming, and lots of other things. So you need to first off establish those sort of skills. And really, I think one of the key things actually in games development is experimentation, and also not really expecting that you're going to get like fully formed games even in a month. It can take several months. Like even a simple game I made called Glitch in the past took me about 5 months, I think, roughly. Some other games I've knocked out for Lud and Dare jams and stuff, but it's usually it can basically just expect that it's going to take you time to get to the point that you want to be at. It's not going to be like an overnight thing that you just make your dream game. It's just not going to happen. So yeah, like I said, if you are wanting to create an FPS or something, maybe look at something like Game Guru Max. I think is coming out soon, which is like their better version of the engine. If you just like purely talking, if you want to create something like non-commercially indie, then that's actually worth exploring. Obviously Unity and Unreal if you have bigger sort of goals, because Unity and Unreal are basically the standard these days for most games dev. And there's another engine called Core, which I've not really looked into much recently, which might be worth exploring too. I think it's like a sort of cut down version of Unreal Engine actually, from what I would look at it. And then obviously going the JavaScript HTML route. If you want to create web-based games, HTML5 games, there's tons of engines for that sort of thing. GameMaker is quite good, I think, for that sort of thing as well. I haven't really played around with it too much. But yeah, basically make something. So even if it's a small thing, just make it. Just make anything. Even if it's an interactive fiction, that's like how I started off doing games dev, was just making an interactive fiction game with CSS and some little tiny bit of JavaScript and HTML. That's it. There's no magic. It's just about doing stuff. And then eventually you get to the point where you feel more confident in what you're doing. Now, the guy who asked me this question originally was asking me about Play Canvas and using that to create an FPS, and that's actually quite a complicated thing to do, because with Play Canvas you'd have to create all the scripts yourself, and a lot of the work you'd have to do yourself. Play Canvas is a great engine, don't get me wrong, but it's quite ambitious to want to produce an FPS in it. So that's why I'd recommend if you're like, I don't know, like a teenager or something and you want to create an FPS game, look at things like maybe Coppercube, Game Guru first, as an entry point for creating those kind of games, because it's far more simple. You can sort of get an idea of level design as well. Level design is a very important thing in game dev, especially if you're making an FPS game. Level design is almost key, really. So definitely experiment with that. I mean, a lot of that basically is just about using your imagination and also thinking about flow in an environment. So, you know, how do you get from A to B to C to D to E to F to G? But you get what I mean. So, and also texture use and blah blah blah. There's tons and tons of things I can go into here, but hopefully that gives anybody watching a general idea. I've sort of aimed this video at like people who just beginners, I guess, and just want to have a very broad overview of how to get into game dev and like where to start. But yeah, like I said, learn JavaScript, learn C++ if you want for the programming side of things. Another thing I should mention as well is Twine for interactive fiction. That's good. It's a good engine and it's quite simple to get the hang of that actually. Anyway, I hope that's useful in some way, shape or form. This is a really quick video, hopefully, of just general things you can do to get into games dev as a total newbie, as a total beginner. So I hope that helps. I've been a nerd. Cheers.